All right. So we're going to move on to 8.2, Facilities Planning Steering Committee Lessons Learned. And Brian, would you like to introduce this item? Whoop. Sorry.
Yes, I absolutely do. Sorry about that. Tonight, we look forward to hearing from Josie Plott with our CSU Institute for the Built Environment, and Amy Hoseth and Micah Nielsen from the Facilities Planning Steering Committee, who will talk to all of us in our community about the lessons learned during the facilities planning process. I want to welcome Josie, Micah, and Amy. Thanks so much for being here and for all of your hard work.
Thank you, Mr. Kingsley. Let's see here. There we go. All right. Thank you for having us again. It's good to be here with you all. It sounds really loud and echoey all of a sudden. So tonight we're here to share with you sort of the some final reflections and recommendations that we have as a result of the time and effort that the Facilities Planning Steering Committee had put into the long-range planning process. So I'll start by, we're going to start by doing a bit of acknowledging sort of the broader voice and perspective that was present on the committee. There were times where, particularly with the setup, with the liaisons, that the full committee didn't necessarily always feel visible to the board. And so we're going to take a little bit of time to share with you who that committee is and the roles that they play in our community and some of their voices and reflections from the process. And then we'll be sharing with you the very high-level recommendations from a reflections and recommendations report that you all received earlier today. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. You know, one of the things that stood out for everyone as we've debriefed over the past couple of weeks and you know, had a chance to reconvene after things have changed directions a couple of times is the integrity and dedication with which this committee approached this work. Every single individual who both applied for, which was most of them, and who were appointed to the committee, approached this work with a very high degree of intention and integrity. We worked together across differences. I will tell you that the committee did not always agree, and that was part of our strength. In that we reflected and represented a wide variety of perspectives, lived experiences, realities, and so we worked together because of and through those differences to help be in service to the district and to our community at large. I also want to acknowledge that this took an incredible emotional toll on many of the people on the committee. They dedicated very long hours. They poured through data. They sat in conversation with each other. They put up proposals and scenarios that would mean that they would be out of a job. They put up proposals and scenarios that meant that their school, their beloved school in their community or their neighborhood would close. And they did that because they were holding the higher purpose and the higher good of this community and this district in their hearts and minds. They also listened intently to the voices of our community through the listening sessions, through every personal conversation that every single one of them had for 4 months. This was the only topic of conversation for most people, whether that was their kitchen table, whether that was at their school, whether that was, you know, awake at 2 o'clock next to their spouse. That's, you know, that's real. And that's work isn't quite done. We're still working through the questionnaire, so the round 2 scenarios questionnaire. There's a subcommittee who is still working through the comments, and you all have heard the sentiments of the community. So that work is carrying forward, and I think that I just wanted to acknowledge and honor that personal, emotional toll that this work took as well. Oh, and I have 2 presentations going. All right, so so the voices of the committee, we asked them to respond to a question. What was a key shift or takeaway from the work on the PSD Facilities Planning Committee? And what I'm going to do, in lieu of having everyone show up and speak for a minute or something, We're going to spend a certain amount of time quietly reading together, which isn't something that we very often do. But I'm just going to flip through the slides and hopefully give you enough time to see and read the comments. Oh wait, I have to flip it on both screens. Okay, I'll get that.
Josie,
Yeah,
may I ask, just to ensure that this content is accessible?
would you like me to read it?
If you wouldn't
I'm
mind,
happy
please,
to.
that would be really helpful.
Sure.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yep, happy to. So let me go back. So parents care deeply about their child's school, and we need that sort of commitment and support for the entire PSD system on an ongoing basis. We are fortunate to live and work in a district where there is no obvious choice for closure. Something does need to happen, but saving money is not the priority. School utilization is. Smaller changes should be implemented first, or attempted first. Navigating conversations about declining enrollment as a community requires a focus on equity, iterative process, and intentional change management. Equity in education is a complex and nuanced issue which deserves deeper study and goes far beyond school closures and consolidations. We need to be mindful of the most marginalized groups and work to take care of special programming like autism, newcomers, Title I. Parents who are working 2 to 3 jobs to make ends meet do not often complete surveys or attend listening sessions. Many were not able to communicate their thoughts and do not have the means to come in masses and advocate for their students. I understand change needs to be made, but please listen to all voices. There is value and need for the community to discuss equity for students in our schools. The data collection and research on equity and school choice need to continue. PSD is a complex district. PSD admin should look at their product and ask, why are some parents choosing to opt out of their neighborhood schools or choosing charter schools? Data, quantitative and qualitative, is critical. There is a need for having clear, well-communicated district consolidation and closure goals so that a multi-objective analysis using both qualitative and quantitative input can be performed to provide objective decision-making. Enrollment declines will double in the next 5 years. Community is passionate about neighborhood schools. Transportation, geography of schools, walkability are all very important aspects of the process. We need information about busing before making decisions. Building utilization numbers and how a school actually functions don't always match up. The community would like to look at other options to save money than to close schools. Use blind data analysis, looking at the numbers for schools without names attached to them. Our East Side schools still need relief. Please help them out. Consolidation needs to happen in the district, but it doesn't need to be drastic. A takeaway was PSD's view that early childhood education is separate. Pre-K children are the future of PSD and society. I advocate that these programs be expanded, fully integrated into vertical K-12 curriculum, and for our district to provide the absolute highest quality pre-care instructional experiences and resources possible. I was grateful to be part of a passionate, integrity-driven group that did good work for our schools and our community, despite being disappointed by the lack of a true blank slate. Ultimately, the board made the right decision to halt the process and to address foundational issues. In future efforts, PSD employees deserve to feel safe to speak candidly and honestly about their experiences, insights, and frustrations. Communication from district leadership was constantly changing and limiting the work we were charged to do. I believe that when district leadership began to come to our steering committee meetings, that the board should have been invited as well to ensure that communication was transparent between all three parties. I also think transparency with the community has not been forthcoming. The board could have come to this conclusion in October and saved this community the trauma and saved the steering committee time and loss of sleep. In the future, more collaboration with staff and board members through the process could be helpful so that the work being done is aligned with district goals along the way. A 37-person steering committee can be highly functional, bring an incredible diversity and depth of expertise, have healthy conflict, and lean into hard conversations, and to rise above thinking about individual schools to prioritize the whole district. The dedication of the people on this committee was astonishing. The compassion with which this wicked problem was approached was awe-inspiring. To think that this work will not be utilized in a way that will help our students is tremendously disappointing. In my 25 years at PSD, serving on just about every committee imaginable, this steering committee by far has operated with the most fidelity, thoughtfulness, and integrity that I have experienced in our system. I am proud to be a member of the steering committee. With good reason, the PSD community is passionate about their schools, and the steering committee exemplified what civil discourse should look like. If we are to engage in this level of disruption, it is imperative that we do so with a more agreed upon foundation of truths about our current reality. And finally, members of the steering committee demonstrated such care and thoughtfulness around this critical work. The process is a direct example of democracy in action with all of its complexities and challenges. And I did include the quote for that. That was our intern, Anya Kaplan-Hartnett, who's now a CSU alumni in political science. And we have a list of the steering committee members who are available on the website. However, it's not always clear what exactly their roles and perspectives were that they represented and that they do currently represent. Assistant Director of Alternative Programs, Associate Dean, User Services and Assessment at CSU. I guess I should say your names too. So the first one is Andrew Vaught and Amy Hoseth, next to me here. Andrew Spain, Parent, Associate Executive Director for the Society for Simulation in Healthcare. Bobby Decker III, Parent, PSD Paraprofessional. Bonnie Jacoby, Parent, Professor of Music Education at CSU. Brian Carnahan, Architect, PSD. Conrad Christ, Parent, Assistant Principal and Athletic Director at Rocky and a PSD grad. Don Kotnick, Principal at Lesher. Elliot Parks, Parent and PSD grad. Jackie Waltz, Parent, Dean of Students and Discovery Teacher at Centennial and PSD grad. Janet Mann, Librarian at Olander, Retired Principal, Curriculum Facilitator and Teacher. Dr. Jenny Cross, Parent, Professor of Sociology at Colorado State University. Jesse Morrill, Parent, Principal at Timnath Middle High. Jessica Kuhn, Parent, Licensed Marriage and Family Therapist. She was great to have on the committee, by the way. They were all great, but Jody Reisenberg, Parent, Senior Program Officer and Community Foundation of Northern Colorado. John Robinson, Parent, History Teacher, President of PEA. Joni Baker, Association of Classified Employees. Josh Ritchie, Principal at Bolts. Caitlin Fulmer, Parent. Kara Harbison, Parent, Assistant Principal at Bacon. Lindsay X, Parent, Policy Director with Colorado Communities for Climate Action. Dr. Lynn Scalia, grandmother of young PSD students, retired Montana School Superintendent. Mariah Ortiz, Grant Specialist, PSD. Mark Buffington, Parent, Assistant Principal and PSD grad. Martin Johns, parent and community member. Matt Liberati, future PSD parent, meaning that he is already a parent and his kids will go to PSD. And a strategy consultant and project manager. Melissa Hodson, parent and Irish elementary school teacher. Michael sorry about that, didn't have that one. Parent, Micah Nielsen, to my right. Parent, social studies teacher at Bolts, PSD grad. Sandy Martinez Garoa, parent, family liaison, culture, language and equity department. Rebecca Everett, parent, Larimer County Community Development Director. Paul Scotty. Now I know how you feel when you're calling people's names out for comment. I'm most of them. IB coordinator at McGraw Elementary School. Rochelle Morse, office manager at Poudre High School. Rusty Quinlan, thank you. Dean of students at Wellington Middle High. Steve Apodaca, principal at Putnam. Tiffany Danford, parent, middle school office manager and PSD grad. Whitney Hirsch, parent and Timnath Elementary School middle teacher. Will Corden, head custodian at Timnath Middle High School. And Shali Summers, parent, school psychologist at Poudre and a PSD grad. One of the things I'm going to miss most is the intensely collaborative, rigorous conversations with this amazing group of people. I think we all really bonded through this experience because there's nothing to bring you together like working through difficult things together. So I just want to extend a personal thank you. Several of the committee members are also here this evening to show their faces and bring some additional some additional faces to the committee that has seemed maybe a little bit behind a black curtain. All right, so what we're about to present to you is the executive summary of a reflections and recommendations document. The draft has been presented to the board earlier today. Our hope is that this will help to capture the key insights, reflections, and recommendations. A final draft will be presented later this week, and we ask that you carefully review and scrutinize and internalize this document. It is reflective of the effort and commitment of this committee. These are very smart, dedicated people, and we want you to be able to carry that work forward, and we believe that there is work to carry forward even though the board has taken a different direction for the time being with school closures and consolidations. We'll also be sharing the survey results from the April 2024 community questionnaire later this week, focused on the round 2 recommendations, so keep your eyes posted for that. And with that, I will turn it over to Micah.
Alrighty, so what we have here is just, like Josie said, some kind of overview of all of what we've done. I'm going to go over immediate needs and opportunities and then kind of move into some long-term opportunities. And then eventually we're going to get to, there's 3 kind of key action steps that we kind of recommend the district move forward with, just knowing what's coming for us. So immediate needs and opportunities, 2 of them the board has already kind of identified as something that needs to be looked at, and that is future facilities for transitions, pathways, and PCA. After that, we have 2 things to kind of talk about Timnath specifically, with balancing elementaries east of I-25 with Timnath Elementary, Bethke Elementary, and Bamford Elementary, and then a strong kind of consideration for pushing Bamford into the Preston and Fossil feeder system to try and alleviate some of that overcrowding that is happening out at Timnath Middle High. After that, we also have one about expanding and improving dual language programming in this district, and one of the big things that came out of the steering committee was a very kind of simple fix for Irish would be to create a choice dual language program in that building. Because as of right now, students move into the Irish boundary, they could speak no Spanish, be a 4th grader, and be put into a dual language program because that is their neighborhood school. And so that's one of those things that would benefit all kids, whether they want to be in a dual language program or not. So next we have, I went the wrong way. There we go. So here we have our longer term opportunities and recommendations. And as I said, given that school closure conversations are likely to continue to happen, we thought it would be important to develop a clear approach by establishing some criteria, talking about time needed to do this properly, and make sure that every stakeholder is involved in this conversation. Develop some processes, some structures to ensure that there's clear communication with principals, board members, central administration, and staff. I think there's a lot of staff members in the district that kind of felt like they were in the dark with this when it was not only affecting their job, but it was affecting their families as well. And so we want you to carefully consider how to engage school communities in this conversation in the future. And so that's where we're headed now. So here's kind of 3 key action steps that we're going to talk about. I'm going to talk about section 1. There's actually 4 parts to section 1. And one thing to think about with this first section is that these are 4 things that we recommend get done first before we have to start having a long-range planning conversation again. And that is to make sure, we'll get to the first one here, which is establish an equity task force. I think you could kind of see in that feedback that you got from steering committee members, equity was a huge conversation that we were having constantly. And so we were really wanting to recommend a qualified equity task force gets put together by the district and is charged with understanding and providing recommendations about equity and how they relate to long-term planning. And so we believe, and I can read the bullet points for you here, that we should conduct a district-wide equity assessment through the lens of long-range planning. We should consider factors such as Title I status, disruption to current support systems, and successful academic growth, access to resources and experiences, effects and potential mitigation of choice patterns, and socioeconomic diversity, and then develop a shared vision and strategy for addressing equity. The next one on there is building utilization calculation methodology. And this is something that we talked about a lot on the steering committee. And even in our last meeting, it got brought up again that buildings get used in different ways for different programs. You could have 2 elementary schools that are the exact same footprint, but they have different programs in them, and they are utilized in different ways. And so that was something that we have been talking about. And so lost my train of thought. Building from calculations done by the district architect, we recommend establishing criteria for calculating rooms that have been modified for specialized uses, for example, center-based programming, maybe safety or intervention spaces, and the existence and function of modulars on site. After that, we have development forecasting. And this one is tough because it's difficult to forecast this information. And so we know that the committee identified some gaps in recent studies and opportunities for improving the methodology that was used. We'd recommend improving data inputs and assumptions related to future developments by coordinating directly with local government. So that's the City of Fort Collins, City of Timnath, Wellington, and Larimer County. And the data should be updated annually. Student yield analysis should account for differences in housing types, trending yields over time, target demographics, so what type of housing is being built? Is it retirement communities? Is it student housing? Is it affordable housing? And what are the yields that typically come out of those types of developments? And then the last one on here is multi-categorical criteria and rubric. And we developed, as a steering committee, we developed all kinds of rubrics. And I know that in my listening sessions, I talked about the rubrics a lot. I thought they were very helpful for us to kind of look at these closures or these potential consolidations or closures in a way that we could put a number on. So it wasn't just so much like, oh, I like my school. That's not my school, so I'll vote for that one. Those kinds of things. And what you have up here is a lot of the recurring kind of data points that ended up in a lot of different people's rubrics. And we had one that was kind of built by everybody, and then we had different rubrics that were built by different people on the committee. I built one myself with different criteria to try and see if it changed some of the schools that were appearing at the top of different people's rubrics. And so geography is a big one. Enrollment, building utilization, factors from the equity task force, we would recommend to be on that rubric in some way. That would again include Title I. Growth scores is a tough one because I know that there's some issues around school consolidations and closures when it comes to scores. Effects of academic outcomes for at-risk students, program access continuity, and projected regional development. And the criterion rubric should receive board approval and be revisited every 10 years. That's a recommendation. One thing that was mentioned in one of the comments from the steering committee is we recommend finding a way, well, at least I personally, I guess I'll say this myself, once that rubric is built, finding a way to obscure school names when looking at that rubric. I found it very helpful. It made me more objective in looking at some of those things. And so that would be something with that rubric just as a tool to use to try and make sure that you are being objective when you are looking at that information. And so this is, again, where we get now to the second part, which I will turn over to Amy.
Yeah, can you click
I
for me?
can click for you.
Thank you, Micah. So the second key action step that we'd recommend is to establish some long-range planning committees and activities. I think our committee did an amazing job in a very tight time frame to come up with scenarios for consideration. But I also think that we all recognize that it would be better to have a longer runway for those kinds of conversations, and to engage both the board and the community and PSD administration and staff in those conversations along the way.
Next slide.
No, stay here. Let's read this one.
All right.
So again, the committee that we're recommending would be responsible for reviewing objectives and metrics for enrollment, building utilization, and equity as it relates to long-range planning, boundary modifications, and informing this kind of compassionate and engaged process when we have the need for school closures, which may come up again in the future. So some of the aspects that we would recommend for this kind of a planning committee would be regular meetings, perhaps quarterly or more often, an annual data review of enrollment trends and building utilization, boundary reviews and adjustments more frequently, so we would recommend approximately every 3 to 5 years. And then reviewing and updating the criteria and the rubrics that Micah was just speaking about at least every 10 years. Yeah. Our committee also recommends that there would be created a technical advisory committee. I'd like to point out that as Josie highlighted at the start of this presentation, we ended up with a really diverse and incredibly talented committee and group of people on the steering committee. However, we also recognize that there's a lot of expertise in our community, and now that people are aware of the potential for school closures, I think we could get additional participation from a lot of people within our community. So we would recommend leveraging the wealth of expertise that we already have in our Fort Collins and Larimer County communities by defining the roles and expectations for those professionals. We would recommend convening local partners and experts in things like land use planning, community development, transportation, facilities management, early childhood education, equity, data analytics, and other areas of expertise. And we'd recommend that that committee would meet regularly to focus on enrollment and facilities data specifically. This came up earlier. We feel that it would be useful to continue to have annual roundtables with elected officials to consider these kinds of long-range planning issues across government entities that would focus on both collaboration and the long-term community vitality. I think this could go both ways. Certainly we can continue to educate elected officials on a regular basis about the challenges and opportunities that we have here in PSD. And we could also help get information from them about how these issues may be addressed in other parts of the state. Communication, collaboration, and stakeholder engagement. One thing that became really clear to our committee very quickly in the process was the incredible importance of communication. Both across our committee, I think we managed that part very well, but also with the community, with the board, and with PSD staff. So we would highly recommend developing better structures for that kind of communication in future groups. methods for information gathering and learning that would enable stakeholders to communicate directly with each other. So, for example, between the board and the community, the board and our committee, the committee and various principals and PSD. And along with that, we should allow time for that systemic understanding to be developed and emerge across PSD. So for people to become familiar with those new forms of communication and to engage in those opportunities. The final of our key action steps that our committee would recommend is to define and clarify the process for potential school closures. I think one thing all of us in this room learned through this process is that anytime you're talking about closing schools, even if you understand that there is a need, that's an emotional and highly reactive kind of conversation. And so we feel like establishing a process for managing those kinds of conversations and those potential closures would go a long way towards preserving goodwill between the district and the community. So we would recommend establishing expectations and an understanding for what would happen if a school's enrollment is declining based on the criteria and the rubric that were discussed earlier. So, for example, develop a compassionate and collaborative process for families, teachers, and staff at low enrollment schools that would involve their school leaders and communities in understanding those enrollment issues, options, and solutions. Principals and school communities should be engaged to understand their situation, what choices they have, and what that future would look like for that school potentially. And then we'd recommend inviting principals to collaborate when schools are starting to drop in enrollment. We had a significant number of principals serving on our steering committee, and I think that the added perspective that they brought to some of those conversations was very critical. And it sort of highlighted, I know for me, the importance of having principals in those conversations along the way. And along with that, we would recommend that we engage in some better change management processes. This is not a new field, and we actually had someone on our committee who's an expert in change management, so his expertise was really useful. We would recommend that we use those best practices from other districts or use established methodologies. Part of this involves ensuring that we have plenty of time and resources and the support to engage in change management I can't talk, specific to any of the decisions that were being made. So both organizationally at the district level and also facilitated and transparent to help school communities adapt to change and the potential for change. We would also recommend developing a consistent and ongoing process of analysis and evaluation, including building a culture that supports the idea of change over time in an inclusive and equitable manner. So understanding that school districts, just like the rest of the world, does not stay static and that change will have to happen, but that we can approach it in these kinds of equitable ways. And I think that's it for me.
So additional report content. So this is if you want to get your real nerdity on. We really got into, well, what is this? What is that? How do we figure out, what do we think is driving enrollment trends and what does the data say? And, so the committee got really curious and dug into a bunch of questions. And so there's some of those kinds of reflections that are in this portion of the document. The first part is more of the kind of here's the 10 things that we think are pretty important. And then the rest of this is more okay, so after sitting in this data, both the quantitative and the qualitative data for months now, we're in month 5, and this was being worked on through today by the committee. Incredible collaborative co-editing process. I've never written a document with 37 of my best friends. And it's been remarkably, it's been kind of cool to see how everybody jumps in and participates, and Google's been kind of great in that way. But we talk about the complexities of declining enrollment. It's not a simple one thing. There's a lot going on that's driving enrollment in our district. Looking back on the board criteria, right? So there's this strong recommendation that the board administration develop a highly considered rubric that you're willing to stick with for a period of time, but something that is developed. Now we've bought some time, right? We have some space. So in that space, can we develop really clear, consistent criteria. And we have some reflections on some of the criteria that we were given and what we thought kind of worked about that and where we came up with questions or in some cases, reservations about those guidelines. And then, as you heard earlier, a systemic review of equity. That just came up over and over again. And what does it really mean? And there's not clear-cut and simple answers, but certainly questions around, disrupting students who are already in schools that know how to support them, right? Particularly in the title schools, you have very specialized staff and teachers who really understand and are doing a fantastic job. If they weren't doing a fantastic job, it might be a different conversation. But the teachers and administrators at our title schools are doing an incredible job of supporting the students. And so we have to be really thoughtful about what it means to disrupt those supports in favor of more art class. And it's not to say that I have anything against art class. It's great. We should all have art. Art's really important for our society and our culture. But if that means disrupting students and putting them in places where they might not get the same level of supports that they need for the challenges that they're facing in their lives, that might not be the equity solution. And so we need to take a deep dive into that and put together a task force who's qualified and capable of really looking at what equity means in long-range planning, maybe beyond. But our task was long-range planning, and we certainly ran head into equity in terms of long-range planning. It also wasn't always what you thought. So as we looked at the analysis, there were a disproportionate number of Title I schools that were initially identified. One of the things about building utilization, Irish Elementary does have modulars. Currently, those modulars are counted in their building utilization. If you take those out, and those don't have water in them, they're not classrooms, they're used for intervention spaces. They're actually at 70% utilization. So they wouldn't have made it on the list without modulars. So being really, that's where that getting into the nitty gritty of the data and understanding that's super important. We did see that Title I schools were disproportionately impacted. We dug into the why, and we didn't come up with really simple, straightforward answers. Our title schools do have higher choice out rates. Some of them have also very high choice in rates, and the net difference isn't as big as you would think. So we wanted to say, what's going on there? What's driving choice? What's the geography about? What's the, what are the other trends that are happening? So there's some information about things like that where we kind of get into the nuances and nitty-gritty details of stuff. There's also a full working sample rubric that has suggested weights and criterias and how you would score different aspects of the board criteria that were offered. Again, we're not suggesting that those are necessarily the criteria that you carry forward forever and anon, but that it's an example of a fully functioning developed rubric where you could go through and evaluate both schools and scenarios should you be inclined to do so. And then we also included, just so that everything's in one place and it's easy to find, we did include the scenario development rationale and the scenarios from this current round of work. You've already seen that documentation, but we did feel like it was important to have that all located in a single document. There are a couple links in the document, again, to the rubric and to a couple other places, but we tried to put all of our work together in one place. So growing forward, I don't want to overstate this, but we spent a lot of hours looking at data and engaging in dialogue and considering systemic forces and effects. And we took deep dives into the complexities of individual schools as well as for the whole system. The committee believes that there is significant value in the work that we've done to date, and it's relevant in the coming months and years for you to consider. So everyone on the committee is willing to continue sharing in whatever capacity or form is useful and helpful to you all. What we've learned by spending and sitting in with this and being in the middle of it from the seats that we're at, we understand you all are in different seats and appreciate that as well. So as the narrative for what we just went through continues to settle and evolve, right? There's an unfolding narrative that's happening in our community about what happened in 2024 and the fall of 2023. There are many important and hard-earned lessons that can inform and carry us forward as a district. And the steering committee effort in this process, we don't want to think that that was in any way a waste of time or resources on the part of the district. Sometimes learning hard lessons takes time and resources. And we think that those can be a place to grow forward from and to build community from, and to now we have perhaps some space to do this process, as many people requested, with more intentionality, to go a little bit slower, but to very much build on what has been done so far. I think that most of us believe that this is very likely not the last time that our community will be having this conversation. And so we want to do our future selves a favor and let the groundwork of this thoughtful, caring collaboration take us forward. And for now, we can take the time to heal, to build trust, and to prepare for the future. So thank you so much for everything that you all have done to contribute to this process. Again, please seek to really understand what is contained within that document, because it is our best thinking and the work product from the incredible investment of time and effort that this volunteer group has made. So thank you so much for listening, and we'd certainly be willing to field any questions that you may have.
Many thanks to Josie for herding the cats.
Absolutely. I think, yes, Josie, you deserve a round of applause. And I'm going to open it up to questions, but before we do, I just wanted to once again take this moment to apologize to the steering committee for the abrupt way that ended. I just wanted to let you know that your work is not in vain, that your work is actually, it's so important to what we are doing now and what we continue to do. It is the foundation. And so I just want to thank every committee member who donated their time, their brain space, their heart, their courage, their everything that came into this. I just want to say thank you so much for your vulnerability in order to work on this. Your excellent way to synthesize all of this information for us. It's truly remarkable, and it will be used, and it will be used going forward. And it's just, again, it's an amazing process that you have put forward. I've been looking at the rubric that you've put forward here, and there's some excellent work here that we will be using. I also just want to take this time too I see Rebecca there, and I just wanted to take the time to say to Rebecca and Lindsay, thank you for coming last week, and also just to apologize on record that last time I misspoke, I misstated your name, and I apologize for that. So just wanted to put that out there as well. But again, just a humongous thank you to all of the steering committee members, to Micah, Amy, Josie for coming tonight and sharing all of the learnings. And I just want you all to know that they will be used. I can guarantee that. And then I'm going to open it up to questions. Anybody have anything? Go ahead, Kevin.
A few things, not so much questions. I want to close the loop on some of my own thinking. I've expressed my frustrations before publicly, and I don't want that to come out as anger directed to you guys at all. So I wanted to clarify that point. I think part of my frustration, if I can distill it, and looking at the work that you've done, and looking at some of the comments that were made in the slides, was that I think I realized, I'm only going to make I statements here, I realized the potential of what this committee was. And I realized how incredible its composition was, and it's a true reflection of our community. And the fact that people showed up when they don't have enough time to lend their expertise in different areas that we all badly need in this room, because we are not all experts in the things that you brought to the table. And so I don't, again, think the work you did was for naught. I think that it's how we choose what to do with it in this moment. And so I was encouraged to see some of the recommendations of the formation of a long-term committee. That was one thing that I actually was thinking of as well. And I thought that we have committees for SEAC, we have subcommittees for legislative updates. We ought to have a liaison from the board directly in that. And so I wanted to speak to some of the comments in the slides. This is from slide 6 that jumped out at me. something does need to happen, but saving money is not the priority, school utilization is, smaller changes should be attempted first. So I want to thank you for giving us some of those small, again, we call them low-hanging fruit. I've been advised not to say that, but some of those small efficiency gains. And so I think we can build on that collectively and work on that now. And so that work is not lost. On slide 20, I was grateful to be a part of a passionate, integrity-driven group that did good work for our schools and our community despite being disappointed by the lack of a true blank slate. Ultimately, the board made the right decision to halt the process and address foundational issues. In future efforts, PSD employees deserve to feel safe to speak candidly and honestly about their experiences, insights, and frustrations. Without that level of transparency, I don't know what the purpose is of the steering committee. If we're not going to re-examine our own shortcomings, intended or not, then I think we're doing a disservice to the progress that we could be making. So I want to highlight that because that resonates with me. Slide 21, communication from district leadership was constantly changing and limiting the work we were charged to do. I believe that when district leadership began to come to our steering committee meetings, that the board should have been invited as well to ensure that communication was transparent between all three parties. I also think transparency with the community was not been forthcoming. And this isn't my opportunity to beat up and down on anyone's head. I think that I stand by my comments last time, which is I think people had good intentions. I think that people may have unintentionally or intentionally inserted themselves into a process naturally because they cared a lot about the outcome of that process. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, but I think we need to be cognizant of that moving forward and say that this is a bias I have, whether it's a perspective or an outcome or a solution that I've come up with. And I'm included in that. I think I have my own biases coming into this, wanting to be moderate and have a slower stepping stone. So I want to challenge that throughout and say that challenging those biases, leaving them at the door and allowing the organic process to unfold is really important. And so, again, I think about a lot of times we think about failures and we think about, we despair, but I also think it's an opportunity to re-examine what we did wrong so that we don't do it again. And so I think we're at an interesting precipice right now. And I can't tell you how much, again, I appreciate the work that you did because you've gotten our community a tremendous leg up and start on this work that 7US couldn't have done. That leadership, with all the work that they do, they couldn't have done in isolation. So I say thank you. Let's keep it up. Let's keep this momentum going. And I'm very interested in every single one of these. And when I have more time to absorb this document, we may invite you to come back and have some more back and forth. I will.
Wait, we didn't, no, wait.
That was my only point. Those for the willing, right? Because this 37 band of mere mortals, to those that want to continue the work, I encourage you to do that. I also want to, just be respectful of those people's time and commitment outside of this process and say they need to take a breath too, and I get that. I personally do. But I don't want to lose the steam. And if there are those that are still willing to serve, man, I hope you do. Because I really would love to have more dialogue, and that's my one vow in this whole process. I'm going to be more intentionally involved in this process. I'm not going to wait for an invitation from anybody either. So that's what I'm going to say.
And we would, of course. There was so much investment, right? There's so much, it was like this, it was the weirdest experience in some ways. I mean, it was so rewarding. It was so challenging. We dove in so hard. We learned so fast together. And there is a huge personal investment. And so, all joking aside, I'm sure that many, many people on the committee would be more than happy to share the perspectives that they've gained through some of them, 100+ hours that they put into working on this and thinking about it. So thank you for that invitation.
Thank you, and thank you for being willing to do that. I know the coalition of the willing may be smaller than the 37, but we will take all the input that we can get. I really appreciate that. And Kevin, I think one of the things that you're stating here is that, and forgive me for putting words in your mouth, but this is an opportunity to fail forward. And so, we can take this opportunity and create significant movement with it, and bring people with us as we do so. So I'd like to think of things like this as a fail forward opportunity. So, others? Go ahead, Jess.
I just want to state that their second to last slide does say, please reach out anytime. So, but I do really have a question. You mentioned wanting expertise for equity on that committee. Do you have some recommendations on what that might look like?
For the task force? You two have been.
If not, it's okay. You can email them or what have you. Just curious.
Good evening, Lindsay X, one of the steering committee members. I think we don't have to start from scratch. I think there's a lot of other entities within this community and statewide and elsewhere that are doing similar work. So let's learn from best practices. I have a sense that your former district advisory board chair would have some ideas on that. I know that when I was with the city of Fort Collins, she helped our team to imagine an equity committee as well and led a process with community members. So I think, again, similar to what you heard earlier, there's a significant amount of expertise already in this community. Now we just have to leverage it. Rebecca?
Okay, Scott?
Yeah, I wanted to thank everybody on the steering committee. I was 100% for the decision of stopping the process, but the biggest concern I had the whole time was, what does that mean to you guys? For what effort, the thousands of hours that went into this? And, I don't want you to feel like you're Sisyphus pushing that rock up for no purpose at all up that hill. This has got us started, and it's really the intense work that you put in is going to be that foundation to get us where we need to be. It actually, I think, was enormously helpful to get us to the right decision. And we'll definitely be using your information. I think the recommendations, I really like getting the principals involved more. I think they're the experts. They know, just the way our system is set up, they know their schools the most and their communities. It's a tough thing because there's a conflict of interest, because it's their jobs also are on the line. But I think a lot of the people on your committee had that same situation. Getting data from the community planners, the city planners, absolutely, I think could have helped us clarify that trend question. What's going on with community trends? I think that could have been that neutral source that maybe we needed. And so I want to dive into that more. And then, the universal pre-K, exploring that. I wish that had been more a part of what you guys had on your plate. And the transportation questions kept coming up over and over and over. It's a hard thing to figure out, but I think this whole process is hard, and we really need to figure that out, because even the community comment tonight about the additional buses that would be needed had we closed some of these schools, I think is valid. Finally, I would say we need to reach into the community and take advantage of people that have offered their expertise, and make a blue ribbon committee. Maybe we call it the Long Range Steering Committee. Oh, it's already been used. But add to your committee more experts. I'm so glad you read off the names and the positions of the people that were on there. I don't think a lot of people in the community realized how much expertise was already on the steering committee and really important voices. So I don't have any questions. I just wanted to thank you guys very much. And Micah, I hope you get some sleep, and that binder, don't burn it. Keep it. We need it as reference. So I love that you have that. So thank you for all your work. Appreciate it.
Just don't use it as bedside reading anymore. Yeah. Bring it into us, and we'll take care of it. Other questions? Go ahead, Carolyn.
I'm going to agree with Scott. This is great foundational work for us moving forward. It's like world-class work. It's like really more than I expected. The depth of the work is wonderful. And then I also want to express my sorrow about the emotional toll that this work took, on you guys. And I just want to acknowledge that and let you know that I'm sorry for that happened. I don't know if this board or the way we did this contributed to that, but I think that's something also that we can learn going forward, is how do we minimize this emotional toll on volunteers, right, who are really just in it to help us. And so I appreciate what you did and for giving us this great foundation to move forward with this work. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Director Reed. And I would also say that a lot of the structural changes that are in the high-level recommendations are meant to reduce the emotional toll on everyone. this was incredibly difficult for our community, and we believe that there are ways to move through this that can be more compassionate and that do not have to be so disruptive. And that is embedded in the high-level recommendations, our structural changes that we believe, the consistency and agreement and clarity on data, and really kind of getting a good foundation for that, the consistency on criteria, and having those be really well vetted, having a steering committee that is, standing, having quieter conversations, one-on-one with schools, and I'm sorry, I keep the mic's over here, so I feel like I'm ignoring you guys, and I'm not. But, having one-on-one conversations with schools, quieter conversations that are more targeted and specific so that it doesn't turn into all of the ambiguity and all of those sorts of things. So I just want to, because you said what you did, I want to, and because it's not maybe apparent in the recommendations, those recommendations are designed to help lessen the emotional toll for everyone in the community.
Hey, Kevin.
A couple more thoughts. I also think part of maybe my own frustration, or maybe the tweaking the process a bit moving forward, I would like to include on our agendas as for board meetings, if it's 15 minutes, if it's 30 minutes, but every board meeting or every other board meeting, some discussion of long-range planning. Because I think as I'm looking through all this, we could talk about this for literally the rest of the night. I just think we need to give ourselves the opportunity to voice those in public a little bit more often. And if that means having someone from the steering committee or someone from the community come and talk about, just to further those discussions so that maybe we're tweaking some charges as we go forward. I just think we need to be talking about it more often. And also the only other charge I'd say too, this is to the board, but also to leadership. I'm reminded of I've told some of you the story, but when I started teaching up in New York, our principal made us all read a passage from Tina Fey's Bossy Pants, which I really liked. We were starting a school from scratch, and so we had to take on a bunch of different roles. And the passage we read was about her theory on improv. And when you go into improv, if someone throws you an off-the-wall idea and you just shut it down, well, so too does the joke and the energy, and so it just dies. So the point of that whole passage was to try to get to a solution, try to get to a yes, try to take the idea and accelerate it with something else. And so I think here we got to be a little more creative. We're giving us a lot to work with, and so thank you for that. And so before we just systematically be the no police and shut things down, I think we should try to canvas some creative solutions to expand our own thinking. And again, if we're starting small, then we're starting small. But I think we should talk about it more often. I think we should get this along a permanent committee formed and done, I would say before the end of the summer. I think that's a task that we should take on. And then we should have a plan of when we're meeting quarterly, et cetera, and when we're going to report, and include that as part of our agenda. I think otherwise it's going to feel sporadic, and we're going to lose the momentum that we've got, and I don't want to do that. So those are my ideas.
Yes, go ahead, Jess.
On that note, we've had so many community members volunteer their expertise and time. I mean, whether that's budget or creating some sort of optimization of the data, qualitative and quantitative, people who have really real expertise in what's the word I'm looking for? Weighting our different data points based on our community's values at the time, right? I think through this process, I've been thinking about, I think choice maybe was more important once upon a time, whereas now neighborhood schools are like the thing, realizing your neighborhood school is going to serve you as well, if not better, potentially, than choicing halfway across town, depending on your values. So I think we have a lot of expertise, and so I agree that we should get these committees going, develop our community values so that we can give those inputs to experts who really have the skill sets that we need to be able to weight this data well. Sorry.
Go ahead, Jim.
Just continuing on the equity theme, and Jessica spoke to this just now a little bit. I think the equity is something that we all kind of look at the elephant and have all these different views on this elephant. And I admire 1.1, establish an equity task force. I think that is awesome. I think we should absolutely do that or some variation of that. And I've read a number of things that have been provided to me regarding equity related to Putnam, not related to Putnam, but they've been very thoughtful, and I've learned a lot through all of those. So I appreciate all of those. And when you publish your final report later this week, I will read the equity chapter several times. So looking forward to that. Thanks.
Hey, Connor.
Just one quick question. Do you think within the committee there was consensus that it was a good idea to stop it last week instead of letting it play out for a couple more weeks? I mean, we don't have this. We didn't see the final survey results. We are still holding engagement sessions, but that could have influenced, some decisions. But consensus amongst the group, never even talked about it.
No consensus. Not on that.
Some yes, some no, a lot in the middle.
Andrew said some yes, some no, a lot in the middle.
But a significant consensus that we didn't go through and decide on one of the options.
I think the committee was divided, to just be perfectly fair. Not divided. We were, I think we were of different minds. And I think those different minds reflected the different minds of those across the community and across the district. So I don't think that I have a sense of where the committee stood on that. I know that the last time we took a vote was just before we put out the scenarios, and we asked everyone, are you thumbs up, thumbs sideways, or thumbs down for putting these scenarios out to the community? And we had 30 responses, and there were 3 thumbs down. So in a consensus-based process, thumbs sideways is, I don't love it, but I can live with it. Thumbs up is, I think we've done our work and we've done a good job. We had 3 thumbs down, and over the course between when we took that poll and when we put the scenarios forward, we resolved, I think, most of the thumbs down. So from that respect, we did have a sense that we had done the work that we had been asked to do within the parameters that we had been asked to do it in, and that we had done, essentially our best work. Was it perfect? Could we keep iterating on it? Maybe. But that we felt like we had taken the tasks that had been given to us, we'd taken the criteria that the board had provided, and we had thoroughly vetted the options that were possible within those parameters and thought about them long and hard, and we debated them long and hard, and we came back with scenarios that we felt both met the criteria and that were responsible for the community. And then I think after that, of course, there was relief among some. And I think for some, there was a sense of, we were invested and believe that this is an important thing for our community and people everywhere in between. Yep. Our strength was not in necessarily in agreeing on everything.
Go ahead, Carolyn.
Hey, so I meant to ask this earlier. This really caught my eye in your executive summary. The wording caught my eye. Strongly consider moving Bamford feeder to Preston Fossil to ease enrollment pressures at Timmins Middle School, High School, while increasing enrollment at Preston Middle School and Fossil Ridge High School. So the word strongly caught my attention. So are you saying that we should consider it like now? Like, is this something that the committee felt so strongly about that they put it in the executive summary that they'd like us to consider it right now?
I think we were looking at the 2025 year still. And I'm looking around at folks to make sure I'm saying, nodding. Yeah, so not necessarily for this coming fall, but for the future. And part of the rationale for that is, there were the balancing of enrollments for the east of I-25 elementaries. We worked hard to find a solution that basically shifted about 60 kids down into Bamford and did some things for Bethke that they were okay with, and it helped to ease some of the enrollment pressures at Timnath Elementary. And then the Bamford to Preston move helps to address So Bamford Elementary going into the Preston feeder helps to address under-enrollment at Preston, as well as enrollment at Fossil. And it frees up capacity at Timnath Middle High for, if memory serves, until 2032 at least. So that gives some real space without a bond in place for additional construction for Timnath Middle High. It seemed like not as drastic as moving all of the middle school students back across the highway, but enough of them, and it's moving them at a time when they would be transitioning anyway. So working through that a little bit, but there would be a way to basically address those, and you saw one of the slides, please address enrollment on the east side. And that came up over and over again as a solution to help do that.
Okay, so I'm going to use Kevin's wording here. I would strongly charge this board and this staff to take that into consideration, and soon, so that people have time to plan.
Agreed with that. Yes, please.
I appreciate the charge. I think staff in partnership with the principals is very keenly aware of this problem of practice and appreciates the explicit nature coming from the steering committee around the urgency. I just want to be clear as I listen to your commentary as a board, is that sense of urgency in service of addressing that for 25, 26? Because there will be people that are listening to this right now. And I just want to be really explicit around the timeline for when any potential change was brought back to this board and or implemented, just so we can make sure people aren't uneasy about what implications that might mean for them for next school year.
I think that has to be done in union with those principals that are going to be affected. I think we talked earlier about principals being the experts in the room, and like, if we're going to do this, I think it's incumbent upon us to work with them on this I don't know what to call it, problem, but on this transition. I think that they understand their communities, right, and then can also share that out with their communities and help us move along and together. Yeah, so I think maybe working with them is the answer.
I think that feels great. Just I guess let me maybe restate, but maybe I didn't say it. I think I'm being unclear, so please forgive me. In partnership with our principals, this would be a proposal brought back to the Board of Education to be implemented no sooner than 25, 26. Is that accurate?
Correct.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's what I needed. Thank you.
Yeah.
And on timing, sorry, no.
I was just going to add to that. I think that's one of the things that we have heard very clearly from the steering committee, is that this is something that even something as what we might think of as simple or minor as this is still disruptive, is still something that the community is going to need some time to adjust to. And so this is something that, yes, we can do it, and we can do it for the 25-26 year, and we can then also have that time to talk about the supports that will be given, to talk about the way that this would be implemented. So I think that runway, as has been referred to, I think is what we need.
Yeah, perfect. Well said. I was going to piggyback a little bit and say that, similar to the conversation we had last time about PCA, is asking leadership how much time they need. Talking to the principals how much time they need that feels right. I think if we're going to do something like this, even if it's a boundary shift or something like that, I think there should probably be a first read and then get some feedback. And then a second read that we all vote, so that way we've had some learn from our lessons past, so we're not going to rush things, we're not going to do things knee-jerk. Let's get the input that we need. We cannot have analysis paralysis, though, and this is my charge to the community, too, is that we're all going to have to roll up our sleeves a little bit and have a little bit of growing pains as we do this. It's not going to be perfect, but I do think that learning for this iterative process, let's figure out what those efficiency gains are. Will it move the needle for, the immediate but also long term? And if it does, if it's feasible and we can live with it and we can do it, then what can we do to support those affected? And I think doing a first read, doing a second read feels right. I think I'm gonna have to look at operations and staff to let us know, how soon we're gonna need to do that, because we're not here in July. We got, one meeting, really, 2 meetings, I guess, in June, and then we're back at it in August, so I want to make sure that what we're charging, too, is actually doable. So I think I'm going to have to lean on you, Brian, to kind of help us in that.
Yeah, that's why I'm pushing on clarity, because I think if it's no sooner than 25, 26, we do not need to address that before the start of next school year, but it needs to be really soon at the beginning, so people are clear around the implications for school choice and all of what that means for those particular families. But I think because this conversation has been very public-facing as a result of the good work of the steering committee, I don't think it'll come as any surprise. But knowing that there's some sense of overcrowding in some of those schools now, people will have a different mindset around what urgency looks like. And so that's why I just wanted to be really clear to members of our community who have intentions around where their children will attend next year. I want to be very clear that this will not have any implications for next school year based on what I'm hearing from our board, but it would have implications once agreed upon and in partnership with the principals for 25-26.
Brian, to give more clarity on that, I think it is very plausible to have the principals come and speak to this themselves, potentially on the June 18th meeting for a first read. Doesn't have to get very, very complicated at all. I think that they've expressed it to the committee. They've expressed it to some of the members here as well, and then potentially have a vote in August. That would leave myself specifically in that area to do community outreach. The one thing that I have reservations about on it is families that are going to Bamford right now have not been, just by the amount of emails that we got, engaged. We start talking about only changing their boundaries, they will engage. And we need to have them on board and understanding the rationale for it, especially in consideration of any kind of funding mechanism going forward in November. That's crucial. So I think that the timeline can be short. I think that we can get that buy-in because it is a logical thing, and I think that there might be a lot of people in that Bamford district who are very appreciative and applicable to doing this. They see that. I mean, it's pretty logical. But we've got to talk to them because they don't know yet.
Go ahead.
I agree wholeheartedly. I think if we've learned anything and if you've shared anything, communication has been a struggle for us in this process. And so I completely agree. Bringing them along will be key. I do think they'll be amenable just based on the few people I've talked to, but bringing the principals in would be great. Connecting with the community would be great, just so that we're all on the same page and understand the challenge.
Other comments? One more? Okay, go ahead.
Totally different. As I'm reading through your reflections and recommendations, and you spoke to it a little bit, employees feeling like they need safety to be able to speak up and share their input. Do you have any recommendations on how leadership or board members can support that more effectively? Because we're going to continue to have hard conversations and we're going to need authentic input from our employees who are in the schools day in, day out.
I wouldn't have anything right off the top of my head. That was not my comment necessarily. I do know, though, that as someone, I want to teach in the district for another 20 years. Like, I've been here 10 years. I want to keep going. My primary concern about joining this project from the get-go was stepping on toes and having it negatively impact my future. And so I would just say, in terms of, personally for me, just a guarantee that there's not going to be judgment when questions are asked or comments are made, wonderings. I remember when we first started this process, we did a lot of what ifs. And it's just trying to inform decisions and thought processes that there's not going to be like a page put in my file that says, hey, 15 years ago, this guy asked a dumb question and it made so-and-so angry, and so he shouldn't be looked at for a promotion or whatever it is. Just that kind of piece of this is a difficult conversation. People are going to be upset potentially. We don't want it to negatively impact our careers, kind of thing.
There's a couple, yeah, it sounds like there's a couple more too.
We appreciate this question. And there's a lot in the appendices, and there's a section around process and power dynamics that we would encourage some reading in. I want to highlight a couple of items in this, and I think it is really important. Commissioner Kafalis, I believe last week, thanked Mr. Kingsley for his role, and I also think it's really worth pausing and thanking Lauren and Dave and the assistant superintendents who went above and beyond to lean in as well, because I know that they also lost sleep, and they asked to have meetings during business hours and then ended up with us till 8 o'clock at night many nights. And so I think it's important to note that, because to my knowledge, this is the first time that the district has engaged with a 37-member committee in this way that has this level of high impact. So no doubt there are lessons to be learned, right, in this area. I do think that putting some guardrails in process, choosing who should be in the room and when, really intentionally, we heard this earlier from other folks, is critically important. The conversation dynamics changed. I mentioned earlier that I worked with the city of Fort Collins for 13 years. Some of you know the former city manager, Darren Atterbury, and I used to call him the principal. And I would say to him, it doesn't really matter if you aren't actually the principal, but when the principal is in the room, things change. And so we have to really honor that dynamics change when in this case, the superintendent or the assistant superintendents, the chief of staff are in the room. Heard so many wonderful comments like, I want to be here for the next 25 years. The dedication in the team is incredible. And so having rules of engagement, having specific guardrails, we have some specific suggestions within that appendices. And then mentioning expertise in the committee, we learned sort of later on that we actually have a power theorist in the committee, which is who Josie was looking to come and give any thoughts as well. And so again, expertise in this community is robust, and I think this is going to be a really important thing to bring into the space, because inevitably, like you all have been talking about, you're going to want principals and staff in the room because they have that expertise too. Thanks.
Andrew Spain, just by means of introduction. I think short version is there are a lot of industries that you can learn from. What my own background comes from healthcare, and historically, and of course most of you probably don't notice, healthcare is the third leading cause of death, going to your doctor, just point blank. You can look at the numbers. The way to reverse that is to remove the autocratic environments and empower every single person at grassroots on up. You can find that in the airline industry, same issue. They had all kinds of problems. I want to see their contract end up with, you get something in your file if you don't say something. Go and look at the FedEx contract, the UPS contract, the United contract, the American contract. Every single pilot has to report every single thing that they noticed out of order. That's the culture you want. That's what you want to do. That's what will save this district. You can be there in just a couple of years because you have an amazing, amazing group of people in your teachers, your staff, and look at your community. The parents, speaking to Mr. Schoenbauer, we want, what is it every school is amazing at? Parents just did that work for you, by the way. It's all done. You just got to compile it. Take advantage of all that, empower all of that, and you'll be sitting back with a district that everybody wants to be in 2 or 3 years.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Other questions, comments? All right.
I know it's late, and
No,
I
go
don't
for it.
mean to belabor this. There's one thing on the executive summary and the immediate opportunities that we haven't talked much about, but I think it deserves some airtime because we were looking for those sort of immediate wins and immediate needs, and that's addressing the dual language program at Irish. And the solutions aren't that complicated. It's really about providing guaranteed busing for all Spanish students who want to be there. It's about providing guaranteed busing for students who come into the Irish boundary, 3rd grade and above, and giving them an option to not go to a dual language school. Putnam seems like perhaps an obvious solution. It's less than a mile away. And also helping to promote Irish fully as a dual language program. I don't understand all the intricacies of how and why choice works, but they grew like 37 kids last year kind of unexpectedly. That program is growing, there's a demand, there's a wait list at Harris. Let's fill that dual language program. And then also just a moment to celebrate the great work that's happening at Bolts in regard to their dual language program. And we have some of that in the report as well. But really, just since we touched on, you all touched on transition pathways and PCA, we obviously agree with you about that. But I just do want to highlight what I think are some relatively meaningful but not overly cumbersome. And I'm saying that from a perspective that I don't know, so I'm sorry if I will look to the assistant supers for that, because I know that like everything's easy to write on a piece of paper and it's way harder to actually do than it sounds. But we saw a real win-win opportunity there to really help both of those schools actually and the students who are attending them by making a few structural changes to Irish.
Go ahead.
One more thing. This will be quick. I noticed in the appendices, and this is a tough look in the mirror to my confreres on the board's guiding principles needed more process and thought put into them. I remember we were sitting in this room in a work session, we hashed it out for 2 hours. And I felt exposed, personally, because I didn't think that I was an expert in a lot of things that we were trying to discuss. So to task the steering committee with these amorphous, one-time guiding principles, I think we board members have to go back to the drawing board a bit too, clarify, tweak, learn from our own lessons about what we experienced through this, and then have better, more specific charges, have better guiding principles, and that should be an iterative process too, right? So I want to give us a little bit of grace, but say, sorry, I know that was part of the impossible task, is that we are the decision makers, so we should have the input we should set some parameters, but again, I'm going to learn from my own humility here, and I need more input from leadership. I need more input from our community. I need more input from the people that have done the deep dive in the data, so that we can come back to the drawing board and say, these are deal breakers. And I think most of us will probably have different opinions now than we started out with in April, or January, whenever we kind of feels like, I don't know when that was, but.
And that is task 1.4, right? And that's task 1.4. And that's even before really starting a steering committee. Now, there could be some collaboration there or something, but it is about getting them right and getting them right enough that they'll stand for 10 years, right? That was sort of the goal or recommendation from that is go slow, get them right, bring us in, bring other people in, whoever you need to help get that to be what it should be, so that we can all sit with that and not be jockeying for space and understanding and navigating whatever.
And the interpretation too,
Right, interpretation, ambiguity, all of that, yeah. So that's very much what is the essence of Action 1.4.
Yeah, and I think that's something that we can go ahead and do, maybe even in a retreat. Not that they're private, because they're still public meetings, but that would give us a bit more of a opportunity to have a real conversation in a unlimited time. Well, maybe not unlimited time span, but less limited time frame for something that we could do. Because I think that's critical for us to do that, and part of what we think we learned too is that we said equity was extremely important to us, and my guess is that we had 7 definitions of equity that then went forward, and everybody scratched their heads and went, well, which one? What do we mean by that? So I think it'd be very worthwhile to have that deep dive and that rubric that you're talking about there of having that criteria in the rubric necessary to then go forward. Yeah. Go ahead, Brian. Yeah.
So, seeking clarity, I think I've heard the representatives from the steering committee kind of ask the board in the last few minutes for us to think about. There were, I think, 4 areas of things to prioritize early, right? One, which was already discussed in our last board meeting around the transition pathways and PCA. I think we heard a little bit today about addressing boundaries east of I-25, and I think we have clarity around that charge moving forward, as well as engaging the Banford community in short order around what that might look like in the event they were to move out of the Timnath Middle High feeder pattern and into the Preston fossil feeder pattern. What I think we just heard was an invitation to also consider how we approach dual language at the elementary school level, knowing we have one school, Harris Bilingual, that has a transportation plan as a choice school, and we have Irish that does not. And so that there are challenges with that in terms of not just accessibility, but also challenges around program continuity as students matriculate into the middle school, or if they move into the Irish boundary at 4th, 5th grade. It's a real challenge that I think we've heard from the steering committee. So I would just like some guidance from the Board of Education if you would like me with staff in partnership with those respective school communities to also begin to look at that opportunity, and if so, when.
Anybody want to jump in? Because my thought would be, yes, I would love to see that. But again, we're looking at the 25-26 school year and seeing what the possibilities are with as far as looking at transportation to Irish, to have that be a second dual language choice school. And then possibly also looking at what that would mean for Bolts, of having that being that continuity for both Harris and Irish at that point. So we have the continuity there of having a dual language program through middle school, which is something that we had heard previously, not tonight, but in previous engagements. But this is that's
Yeah,
me.
no,
So
thank you. Is there general consensus on that charge?
I think that last one that you're talking about, the Irish and Harris, is a much harder lift. A lot more moving pieces, so I'm not sure if we can get that in place and fleshed out for 25-26, especially considering that there may be some of the unforeseen consequences of that is families that want a choice out. December, I think it is 15th is the choice date this year, and I think that's a pretty tight time frame on that. So it may be, I think it's worth investigating, but maybe for the further school year.
I would say, again, no earlier than 25-26. And so that could certainly be for the following year as well, especially as we dig into it and see what possibilities are. I think that's right, Connor. Yeah, Kevin.
If I can ask the steering committee again, since we've got them here, those 4 bullets, I mean, something drove those to be the immediate recommendations. Can we not start with those 4? Are we talking about, just to be clear, are we talking about
Yeah.
deviating from those? Or are we
No,
talking about
I think we have clarity as staff on 3 of the 4 have been very explicit by the board in response to what we've heard from the steering committee. What I heard Josie articulate as an invitation to our governance team is that we haven't really spoke to a specific charge around that one last bullet specific to Irish.
I don't know. I don't want to speak for you, so please tell me if I'm wrong here, but I think they've given us the efficiency gains we should be examining right now and when I say right now, for 2025, 2026. Now, again, I think going through this, Brian, I think if you guys come back and you say we cannot do 2 of these, then we can't do it. And I think that's fine. I think we start with these 4. And as far as the specific charge to Irish, I think that if I can invite you guys in and speak to some of the solutions you were thinking through there, I think that would help too.
Hi, everyone. Rebecca Everett. I want to start in talking about Irish by saying that the ideas for either 100% choice or more of a shared boundary model for Irish really came from that school community. This is something that the Irish staff, the parents, really generated as an idea early on in this process before even the listening sessions happened, as they saw that this was a conversation happening in the community, and the community generated this as an idea that helps address challenges that they're experiencing now. So I'm sure there's not consensus around that idea, but it is something that is not an idea that the committee came up with ourselves, but it is something that came from the community. There were a couple models that were kind of thrown out there for consideration. One was moving Irish to essentially a similar model to Harris, 100% choice that includes busing for certain students. An alternative model that was also proposed is more of a shared boundary with Putnam Elementary, where depending on which either your native language or what your preference is for which school. There would be kind of reciprocal busing within that shared boundary or between the two school boundaries, so that it's easier to get access to the school that best meets your preferences and needs as a family. Does that answer the question?
And then, Rebecca, there was a third option that kind of evolved over the course of the conversation, which was basically that Putnam and Irish each keep their neighborhood boundaries, but that there is guaranteed busing between, particularly from Irish to Putnam, should a student enter third grade or above, and not already be Spanish speaking, that it would be important for that student to have the option to go to a school that was not a dual language school and to have guaranteed busing for that. So it was more of a guaranteed busing for Spanish speaking students of choice and within the Irish boundary to go to Irish. So it evolved a little bit into like sort of a third option as well that is maybe a little less complicated than the shared boundary option. All three of those were kind of brought forward, and we would strongly encourage you to work with the leadership at those schools to identify the options and ultimately the path forward.
And
Go ahead, Jim.
Rebecca, were the issues primarily around enrollment that you talked about? You said there were issues. Were there other issues?
So some of the challenges expressed by the Irish community are relate to disparities between the Irish model and the Harris model. Right now, Harris only accepts new students during the choice window and not year-round. Irish accepts students year-round, and that creates one dynamic. Harris guarantees busing for Spanish-speaking students from anywhere in the community. Irish cannot provide that as a neighborhood school. Harris, as a 100% choice school, is able to market themselves as a school community-wide. Irish, as a neighborhood school, is not able to do that. So there are disparities in how those two schools are able to get visibility and access for students into their school.
Thank you. Very helpful.
Yeah, I think that really clarifies, if that, yeah. But just for, I think too, for the community to be aware that in our last meeting, we did talk about transitions in PCA. And so that charge was given. So that was sort of bullet point 1. And then we've talked about bullet point 2 and 3 in the immediate opportunities and recommendations that y'all give as far as boundaries east of I-25 and moving Bamford to Preston. That was a charge given to not no sooner than the 25-26 school year. And then the last one is to look into the possibilities for Irish and improved dual language programming no sooner than the 25-26 school year. So if there's any questions on that, or I just want to make sure.
More, I'm just looking over at Jeff because he's going to have a super light summer with the rollout that we just voted on about an hour ago. And so I know he's, it's going to put a deficit into your Nintendo playing. I'm sorry, but if you need more time too, I think that's helpful for us to know that, because if what we're talking about is a Minesweeper / chess, it's gonna be impossible, and I'd rather know that now.
Yeah, and I think it's important to state the no sooner than 25, 26, so that if we hear that this is something, let me back up for just a moment and thank staff for what they've been doing for the last year plus, and what's been going on, because as much as they look like ducks floating on the water and nothing, it just rolls right off their back, they are madly paddling underneath, and they have been for the last year. And I just, we need to take the time to thank staff for doing that. We need to let them know just how we see how hard they've been working, that we know what they have been putting in, the hours they've been putting, the time, the heart, the brain cells, all of it. By seeing that, we also know that this has to, we have not stopped. We can't stop. We need to continue. And so hopefully by taking smaller bites of the elephant here, we can go ahead and do that. And that means that if you need more time, please state that. And so say if it comes to, we can do 2 things for 25, 26, but we can't do 4, whatever it might be, just let us know as far as that is concerned, but it allows us to have a stable way to move forward. So, and no, please do sleep. We need all the brain cells working. Yes. Other thoughts? All right.